Welcome, Perennial Pride listeners. Thanks for joining me as always. Really excited to be back here with a good friend, Brandon Jenkins. Jenks. So, coach, owner of Tier 1 Coaching. We're on part 3 here of our series, our 4-part series. And last time we were chatting, Brandon, we were talking about resilience and how important that is to withstand all the ups and downs of life, business, you name it. We're always going to be faced with that. And that's great. And it's important to be able to deal with it. Unfortunately, these days you can sense from this world that a lot of people are not able to withstand things that are unforeseen or challenging. It's tough, and in life it can be difficult. So having resilience is key. But today we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk more about, how do I unleash all the potential we have? How can we reach that pinnacle of what we see as our potential in our lives? And I think, unfortunately, there's probably a lot of cases where people don't reach that for a whole host of reasons. So, Brandon, thanks for joining me today again in this episode.
Yeah, Tom, I'm really enjoying the series that we've engaged in here, part 3. I'm excited today. And I think that the topics we are tackling are important for a whole host of people, entrepreneurs, leaders, really anyone in today's world, just kind of wanting a little bit more insight on things like resilience and things like unlocking their potential. So excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation today.
That's awesome. And to your point, obviously, we're directing a lot of this to people in business and maybe in your jobs and trying to be successful in your careers, but these are all very applicable in just living life, right? Being a better father, right? So I think can take them as good insights for a lot of aspects of your life. So thinking about reaching potential, and I think about it, because I'm a big sports guy, I always think about, you see people with raw talent of size, speed, strength, etc., and you say, wow, some people just never reach their potential, right? For whatever reason. And there could be a host of them. And that goes probably with just anybody in their lives. So, Brandon, from where your experience and people you worked with or, people that you're helping directly through coaching, like what are some big things that maybe, stop people from reaching that potential that they could possibly get to?
I think first it's like a recognition that we all, especially by the time we get to adulthood, right? We all have these resources, both internal and external, and they are within us. And sometimes it just seems like we need a little bit of help kind of uncovering what could potentially be holding us back. And so, I think to begin to be able to unlock potential, of course, that also is assuming that. So if you believe that you have more potential to unlock, then you are probably seeing somewhere in your life an area where you're not quite achieving what you're envisioning. You're not acting the way that you believe that you could be, or maybe that you believe you should be. So if you believe you need to unlock, or that you could unlock potential, then the implication for me at least is that there's probably an area where you don't feel like you are actually performing the way that you would like to be performing, or you're not making progress towards a goal that you believe you should and could be able to make progress towards. So I say all that to kind of set the foundation of try to get into the mindset of somebody who is looking to unlock more of that potential. And so with that basic understanding, then I would say the number one thing that I see with clients and people that I'm working with is they've got a whole bunch of beliefs and assumptions floating around in their minds about how the world works. And that's completely normal. We all have that from birth. That's just how we're designed. Is we're in an environment, we're in a culture, we're in a family, we have friends, we're in schools, and we're absorbing our environment and the life we're living. What happens when we do certain things, we see what happens, and then that goes right back into the brain as, okay, this is what happens when I do X. This is what happens when I do Y. The problem with that is a lot of those beliefs and assumptions, we become subject to them. They're just in our heads and we don't even know it. We don't recognize that there's that assumption we're making that then downstream is leading us to act in a certain way. And when we're talking about potential and trying to unlock potential, we're talking about, we're acting in ways that aren't quite getting us where we want to be. And the reason we're acting like that is because deep down we have these beliefs and assumptions about how things work. And so to me, one of the number one things to unlocking potential is uncovering, revealing how we look at the world, like the beliefs we're carrying around about whatever it is we're trying to achieve. Step one. And then step two is then we need to determine whether or not that's actually true for us anymore. Oh, I uncovered this belief. Okay. Is that actually true? Does that serve me anymore? And what if things were different? What if I believed maybe the exact opposite of that? Like what would be possible then? To me, that is like the crux of unlocking potential.
Well, I find it interesting, especially someone who's used to work for a job and now I'm a business owner and parent. You have all these different responsibilities. And to your point, some of these things, especially when you're growing up and younger and we're teaching our kids certain things, those things are going to, for good or bad, get probably instilled in them to believe something, right? Believe, for instance, everyone should go to college, right? Obviously, education is important, but college is the only way for people to succeed, right? And we kind of lead people down a path, and it may not be acceptable to start thinking differently, or to your point, testing it, right? So we start running down a path where we believe is right because we're told it left and right, and it takes courage to challenge it, right? To evaluate it. And, and sometimes people may never go down a path that was never their path, but that's just the path they go, right?
Yeah.
You live in someone else's dream or idea of success. And to your point, when you're going to maybe stop to reflect on how you see it, or would you truly believe it, or are you just following it because that's what we're told?
Yeah. I mean, you're describing the golden path fallacy right now, which is, in a nutshell, it is when you are on that path, whatever it is, and you're kind of on autopilot. You're kind of just there because you thought that's what you were supposed to be doing, and you just got on the automatic. The perfect example is like graduate high school, go to college for 4 years, graduate there, get a job, and now I'm supposed to climb the ladder. And a lot of it's like you said, like maybe we were raised to feel like that's it. That's what you do. You got to graduate high school, you got to go to college, and then after that's how you're going to get a good job, etc. And the fallacy comes in play because there's a whole bunch of beliefs and assumptions that you're operating off of. And that chances are you haven't really tested them. You haven't really challenged them and said, hey, this belief that I have to stick with this job for 40 years and do everything I can to promote and climb the ladder. First of all, oh man, yeah, I guess I am believing that I have to keep doing this. Second, is that true? I mean, what would happen if I didn't do that, right? Find other people who have like this different path, different approach. Talk to them, that right there might become your first piece of evidence that says, oh, well, there's this other way of looking at things. And what would I do if I were looking at things like that? And so then you begin to break the fallacy because you're becoming more intentional. You start to understand why you're on the path you're on. And man, when you combine that with really high self-awareness of your values and passions and what you believe you're uniquely great at and you're uniquely meant to do, now you start to look at your different options, things you could do, paths you could take, and you start to align those with that inner, uniqueness, that inner blueprint, now you could end up carving a path that's much more fulfilling and much more in line with the person you want to become, the person you're meant to become. So, yeah.
And I get, especially in the world we live in, developed areas, and you see so much wealth, success, and things. It's almost, and now social media obviously is everywhere. It's like embedded in our lives. It's a natural way to compare, right? That's just a natural thing we do. I see these crazy lists of at what age you're supposed to have $1 million or something. Everything's comparison. And you really have to kind of step back and say, well, like you said, come self-aware of what's unique about me and where I want to go in this world, right? And how I want to show up, and what does success mean to me? What does that look like? Not what Forbes or U.S. News, whatever newspaper will tell us or society tells us, but it makes it much more difficult to have the kind of free thinking around it, because we're just bombarded with what we're supposed to do. What is it? What's the example? Right. So how do you help folks in that mind to sort of even do that self-awareness to kind of get away from that sort of comparison mode and always looking external, like
Meet them where they're at first and just be curious about how they got to where they're at and what path are they on? What path have they already taken and why? In a nutshell, it's helping them kind of start to process and reveal some of these beliefs that got them to where they're at. And some of these beliefs and assumptions they're making that are leading them to act in whatever ways they're acting on their day-to-day interactions. Meeting someone where they're at might mean, hey, you jump on a call with me and it might be like, hey, from our last call to now, what is one or two things that you did or interactions that you had and you really noticed a reaction, whether it was really positive, really negative. That might be a question. And then from there, it's like, oh, okay, well, why was that so positive? Like, what did you love so much about that? And what we're doing is we're using your real life. We're using the things that you're already doing. And we're just trying to go a little bit deeper to try to uncover those beliefs and reveal those beliefs. And if it's something that's not working for you and you reveal a belief, then maybe it's like, well, what if things were different? Some version of the opposite of what you believe or a different version of what you believe. And we start to think about that. And maybe it's like, well, how could you prove to yourself that is or isn't true? And then the person comes up with some ideas to prove that it's not true. So essentially, that's what coaching is. It's meeting someone where they're at, and it's helping them to process through and get to the core beliefs and assumptions that they're making, because those core beliefs and assumptions are in some way, they are leading to the way that you're acting, the things that you're doing, which are having an influence on whether or not you achieve whatever it is you're trying to achieve. And then the other layer to that is, as we're pulling out what you believe, what your assumptions are, we're also pulling out what you value, right? What you are passionate about. What's uniquely you? Like, what are you just so good at and you love it? And you probably just take it for granted, right? That you just assume that everybody would love that. That's something unique to you that you really love and you're really good at. And we start to pull those out too. And so you're starting to see what you believe and assume. You're also getting a sense of what's really important to you. And you may be surprised to find what's really important to you. Maybe you never gave it a second thought. And now all of a sudden it's like front and center. And so now you're like looking for that as you go about your day and as you interact with people. So that's how.
It's interesting because, a lot of people, she's a psychologist and she's seen a lot of people and talked to a lot of people and helped them in different ways. And one common thread around a lot of her patients was that people were living, a life that people expected of them, not something that was aligned to them. And so they're just kind of living in this sort of facade of a life. And it's not surprising there's issues. And obviously, we're talking about the topic of reaching potential. Well, you're going down the path and putting on a mask of something that you're not, that's not you. So it's probably nearly impossible to reach a maximum level of what you can become because you're having to kind of pretend you're somebody else or act a certain way versus what you're naturally gifted at, which you may not appreciate, right, is unique and special. And maybe oftentimes they're suppressed in some way, right? You don't get to use them because of what your role is or what you're living on a daily basis. And, it can go unnoticed or unused in some way.
Yeah.
So
100%.
one of the things I know you've talked a little bit about is, I would call it like a natural style of leadership that, you kind of can help people uncover about themselves, because some people may say they're not leaders, but they really are. They can be. But having what's the natural way you lead yourself, others, your business, and others in life. Can you talk a little bit more about that concept and where that shows up in the world of reaching potential?
Yeah. That idea stems from just my observations over a career of leaders who I really admired, people who I really admire, honestly, right? It's those who are just confident in themselves and they show up confident in themselves, not trying to be something or someone, that they're not trying to copy and paste whatever they read most recently in the latest leadership book of all the things you're supposed to do as a leader. I'm not saying you can't learn from those books. I just mean you can tell the ones who are kind of unsure of themselves and they just start like copy and pasting things read. And just noticing over a career, man, what is it about them that I like? And it was that natural style, that ease. And not that leading was easy, but like they just made it seem like, well, that's just who they are. They're so natural at that. And I think when I was younger, I might have thought, oh, natural born leader, like some people are just born with these attributes. And I think that is actually probably a common belief out there. And I think it's perpetuated by our culture and movies and TV shows and things like that. And I actually don't believe in the natural born leader. I believe that there's folks with some innate traits that might be very beneficial and a strength in different leadership scenarios, right? Everybody has things in their blueprint, and in different scenarios, they're going to be strengths. And in other scenarios, it's like maybe they should probably call in some help, because in these other scenarios, their strengths aren't necessarily strengths in that scenario. So I don't really believe natural born leaders. I believe in the leader who, through experience and intentional reflection and some self-awareness work, just is really in tune with themselves, with their values, with their unique abilities, with what they believe in. We're talking about beliefs and assumptions this whole time. Okay, well, what do they believe in? The natural leader has a really strong sense of that. And then they can adapt to their leadership scenarios, their teams, their organizations, and they know when they are the natural fit and when to get the team involved. I mean, leadership is team, right? So they're always getting the team involved if they're great leaders. However, they learn like when is it best for them to be out in front and when is it best for them to take a back seat and somebody else be out in front. And they're very confident in themselves, and they're very willing to say when they don't know something, and that's okay, because just because they don't know something or they're not the expert in a certain area, that's okay, because they know themselves and they recognize that, and they'll call in help. They ask for help. They'll call in someone else from the team. And your teammates can see that. Like I told you, like that's what I noticed about the leaders I admired most. I could sense that. I know they don't have it all figured out and they didn't know everything. I still was very confident in them, was very drawn to them, because there was a lot of integrity there. They knew who they were and what they stood for. They didn't try to be something that they weren't. their actions demonstrated whatever, their values and whatever they would tell us and put on their philosophy and put out in meetings or whatever. And then that's how they acted, right? So they just had this integrity about them. And so to me, it's that combination of the awareness, the self-awareness, and then the courage and confidence to lean into that uniqueness as you lead and go about, whatever it is that you're doing.
Well, I find it interesting because, to your point, I would agree that people who you think they know everything. I've been in rooms where you couldn't disagree with the leader, or you would get basically reprimanded, like he or she knew the best, right? And it was just, it keeps people quiet or unwilling to contribute and reduces their potential of what they probably have great idea or ways they can contribute that kind of get squashed. And so great leaders are trying to build others up. And I think that's a topic we're going to go to the next episode around building teams and leaders and such. And that's what leaders do. And they're humble enough to know that to get the most out of the best of everyone requires them to not be in charge of everything, right?
Yeah.
And have all the answers. Fitting into knowing your strengths and weaknesses and being okay with sometimes deferring and leveraging others and their abilities takes some courage in itself, because you're now vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm supposed to be the leader with all the answers, but I'm going to defer to others. That in itself takes a different sort of mindset, I think.
Yeah. That right there, you just highlighted a common belief of, especially as a new leader who may have been an expert and just did really well and got promoted into this new leadership role. And now all of a sudden they think they're expected to have all the answers. Not only be the expert, but now be able to answer for the entire team, always have the answers, always know what to tell the people working for you, like what to do. This is a common belief for a new leader that I have just found over my lifetime of experience not to be true. It's just not true. The effective leaders, especially the more people that you're responsible for, the less you're going to know about everything that's going on. And the less all your teammates expect you to know everything. That your teammates, especially the larger the organization, right? Your teammates know that you're human. And no matter how brilliant you may be, they know that you don't know everything. And so it actually starts to degrade trust a little bit, and maybe a lot, when you constantly have to be the one with all the answers. And it seems like you always have an answer for everything. I become a bit skeptical of that, no matter how brilliant the person is. And I've had leaders who, like you said, it was very difficult to disagree with them, offer your perspective if it was different than theirs. They just were very hesitant. They didn't want anything to do with that. Even when they knew that, oh, you know what, I was wrong, you're right. It was like they hated it. You could just tell that they were like, like there's a chink in the armor and you see that now. And now it's like, I don't like that. I never got that feeling. I'm not saying they never try to be more confident than maybe they should have in a certain situation or whatever. But I never got the feeling that they just were like, you can't tell me something new. I don't want to hear it if it's not what I think. The ones I admired most, they wanted to know, you know what? You're right. Jenks, you're right. I didn't see that. So glad you pointed that out. We're going to pivot. We're going to do it this way. Not only do they react like that, but they react like that. And now I see that and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to offer it again. Like if I see an area where can be an improvement or where we're running off the tracks, I'm going to bring it up because I know that you as my leader, you want to know that. You're going to accept that. Right. And I know we're going to get to the team aspect of it next time. It's so important. And when we were talking about leadership, I mean, you're talking about people, connections, and teams. And so like the ability to move beyond yourself and being an expert in charge of just your widget or flying an aircraft, if you're a pilot like I was, or whatever your area of expertise is, when you're talking about being an effective leader, you're moving beyond that. You're moving into the realm of connections with other people. And how do you get all these experts to come together and help them unlock their potential in their areas of expertise? And maybe they have teams underneath them. How are you going to help that leader who has teams underneath them? How are you going to help them be able to do the same thing for their smaller teams? Like, this is when you start to get into the realm of leadership and like just that whole idea that you have to have all the answers and be the expert on everything. Man, the quicker you recognize that that belief might be holding you back and prove to yourself that it's not true, the better.
However, they can easily fall prey, which a lot of people do, into trying to do everything themselves, one thing, right? And that, I think that involves there's some control, obviously, aspects to that, but a lack of maybe even trusting anyone else to do it. But if you're running larger teams, be able to trust like your leaders and people to manage and do things in the level that you expect, I assume that can really cause some damage, right? Because there's a lack of trust and respect across the board, up and down. And it's probably overly burdensome on the leaders because they're having to do way more. They're responsible for way more. And that's probably going to reduce the potential for the overall organization, team, whatever, the group, because of that kind of culture design, right? Or the group. So, any kind of thoughts of that when you've seen some of that go on in terms of like over managing, I guess, micromanaging?
Yeah, I mean, every situation's different. So the listener, your team that you're working with, your situation at work is different than maybe what I've experienced. Context always matters. And there will be non-negotiables in your business and left and right limits that you just can't let someone cross, and you can't fail. There's certain spots where you just can't fail. And so you won't let someone get to that point. In general, though, if you're doing everything and you're setting the how we're going to get everything done, then how are you helping your team and your teammates realize their full potential? Potential means that there's some energy, there's something in there, it's stored up. And so we want to unleash it and release it instead of helping them kind of discover the approach they need to take for themselves and helping them come up with some answers on their own. Then they're keeping all that bottled up. You're not unlocking that potential because you're just telling them what to do. If that's what you find yourself doing as a leader, you're doing everything. You have to be the expert all the time. Things have to be done exactly the way you say. I can tell you that if that's how it is, then the person who's doing those things, how creative are they being? How much potential are they unlocking? They're just doing what you told them to do. And so if you want to unlock, if you want teammates who are innovative and come up with even better ways to do things, and who they actually don't, most of the time, they don't need you in the room, or they don't need to call you before they do anything because they are self-sufficient, innovating, self-correcting, self-assessing, then it's maybe start to think about, okay, how do I actually empower these folks? How do I help them unleash their potential? How do I empower them so that they can do these things? And I don't have to be over their shoulder. I don't have to give them step-by-step checklists. If you want to grow, like, the larger the organization is, the more important that is. If it's you and one other person, the person might not like it, but you could probably get by doing that. The larger the organization, the more people involved, the more there are teams of teams, like teams within the team, then the more you're going to have to start to learn how to lead and empower people versus just SOPs, checklists, etc.
Yeah, and to your point, when it gets larger, it's obviously way more challenging around that to keep people aligned and consistent. And, I've seen it where it's done well and where it's done very poorly, and then basically infects the entire environment and basically brings everything down. And, all right, so it's so critical to set the tone, if you will, right? And,
100%.
And a lot of it too, these are just sort of barriers, things that may be blocking things. And, one of the things that as I was thinking through this, as you were talking, was around the level of, what we talked about in the very first episode was around purpose. And when you're not really tied to any level of purpose or knowing what that is, it may not sort of give you that motivation and energy to even think about new things or doing things differently, right? There's no connection. It's kind of just running through the motions, if you will. And in those situations, you hear those things like these days, like quietly quitting or whatever you want to call it, like that is probably a lot of stuff being left on the table because there's no connection to a broader purpose in what you're doing.
Tom, I hope in our next one, when we talk about team, we touch on this. I'll mention it briefly here. The ability to help your teammates, the people working with you, the ability to help them connect their own values. So first of all, kind of recognize what even is important to them, what they value. Connecting that to the organizational values, to the organizational purpose and mission is huge. And it gets after a little bit of what you just talked about. Quiet quitting is most likely a person who feels no tie, feels no connection between what they believe in and are passionate about and value. They don't feel much of a connection between that and what the team values, what the business values, what the mission is. They don't feel that. Otherwise, they'd be a little bit more jazzed up. They probably wouldn't be quiet quitting. Context always matters, remember? But for the most part, man, I got someone in my organization who just doesn't want to be there. There either is not much of a connection between what they value and the organization, or they just don't see it for whatever reason. And so one of the leaders, in my opinion, one of the most valuable and effective things they can do is learn how to help teammates connect their own individual personal values to the organizational values.
Huge. And the other part of this too, I think obviously a lot of this goes with a journey of all the things you talked about earlier in this conversation, self-reflection, really, maybe talking through somebody to explore these things and getting to kind of know your natural tendencies or style, and obviously down to, what you truly value, and getting very comfortable with that. And that might take some time, right, in exploration. And that's why you go through a process to do this. And but once you do that, and then you say, okay, well, and I know I've talked to you personally about these sorts of things. How do you build your life and business around that? Right. So it fits well because, just like we talked about when we started, sometimes we go down a path of what we believe is right. And at the time, that's all we do. We may not have been connecting anything with our broader passion and values and our sort of core essence and blueprint. But when we figure that out, like, how do you create the systems and life around it so they stay aligned? Can you talk a little bit about that? That's a kind of a big question.
When you do the work to really reflect on and reveal your core values, passions, purpose, like your uniqueness, your unique blueprint, first of all, the work to do that is like a reflection on what you're already doing. Like the interactions, the experiences that you're having, the actions you're taking, the meetings you're sitting in, the projects you're working on, and you're learning how to extract from that what was really core to it, like what was important about it, what really just grinded your gears, like you didn't like it at all. And you're kind of looking at your real life and you're extracting from that. And you may be thinking back to old stories, and you're thinking back to maybe a time a year ago when you just remember this. You were so in the flow, or this event was so memorable to you. And so you may be going there too to pull out some of this stuff. What you're doing though, in conjunction with all the work to like reveal blueprint, you're actually learning how to find that in the everyday stuff that you're doing. And it becomes this like infinite cycle that then even after you've done the work, now you can actually continue to go about your business. You might stay in the same job you're in, Except now that you're in that job and on that path, maybe still, now you're like actually aware of where you'd like to be spending more of your time and where you believe you're uniquely meant to be focusing when you're contributing in a meeting, contributing to the leadership team, talking to a teammate. You're more aware of like why you're there. Like Tom, why are you the one in this meeting speaking up? Oh, because Tom, you have a unique perspective that stems from your unique blueprint. And so you start to look for that. And then you're like, okay, well, maybe I want to experiment with something else. Maybe I want to try something else. I see alignment. I see my purpose. But I want to experiment with some other things that maybe I can express even more. Maybe I can do even more with this. And so you start to look at, you look into it, and it's not huge, doesn't have to be huge jumps, huge, like, all right, I've been doing this for 30 years and now I'm just going to quit tomorrow, walk out, no plan, nothing, and go over here and try to start doing this. Might be that, could look like that, I guess. And I'm certainly people have done that, but it doesn't have to. That could be overwhelming for a lot of people. It doesn't have to be that. You can start to experiment with things while you're still kind of doing what you were doing because you have been going through this and you have some practice and you are kind of looking at other avenues and you start to experiment a little bit and just small, aligned, consistent actions kind of in that direction and being intentional with recognizing how you feel about it. Like, what do you like about it? What don't you like about it? I expected it to be like this, but it wasn't quite like that. Why was that? And it's that what you've been learning as you've been uncovering this stuff for yourself all along is how to go out in life and be intentional with this and listen, right? Listen and be in tune with how you're feeling about things and learning to follow that. And so that those small, consistent, purpose-aligned actions are how you eventually kind of carve out the life that you're meant to live. And that could be like infinite number of experiments throughout your life. I guess one of the things is I would encourage folks to kind of relinquish the idea that you reveal a purpose and that means you're meant to do this one thing for the rest of your life. I would challenge that with you can find your purpose in an almost infinite number of things. In fact, if you believe you're connected to the planet and people, it's like, why would there only be one specific thing that you're supposed to do for the rest of your life? Now, I believe you can find your purpose in a number of things. And so you can give yourself the permission to experiment with some different things with this newfound ability to look for what's most important to you, to feel that energy and flow, to look for ways you can express your purpose. That's where I would start. It wouldn't be some big, necessarily I got to go start this new business based on my purpose,
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I think it's having some intentionality to it, and just on occasion reflect on it, right? Maybe even just 10 minutes or something. I don't know. Take an inventory of the day, just like what were the highlights and lowlights of it. Like one of the things that just, and we always complain around, there's always pieces of our jobs and businesses we hate. Well, why is that? Versus on the other side, like you said, those are times that, man, if I could bottle that moment or hour, or whatever that thing was, I could do that all day long. Yeah. Right. And even just pay attention. You may not even know why yet. And that's why you go through this kind of discovery. You may not never really pay much attention to it. You just kind of were operating in that manner and it just gave you a little boost. But, sometimes you need some help to kind of examine what's driving that. What's really impacting your life that really, drives you down that way. And it might be just buried in who you are, which is pretty fun to explore because just like whatever, like snowflakes, we're all so unique, unless you're, I guess you're identical twins, DNA the same, but even they turn out to be different, and, even see in my own family where my sons are completely different.
Yeah.
And it's really cool, but you got to find out what makes you tick and why you were put on this earth, and then, go to work exploring it so that you can get to what we're talking about is likely reaching the potential that, you have. It takes effort though, right? So
Yes.
starting there is a good start, right, Brandon? Like
Yes.
taking the time to just reflect on it a little bit and identify key moments and days in life and get people like you and others that can help them flesh it out and talk through it if they ever want to.
100%.
So any last parting shots around, helping people think about unleashing more of their own potential or all others around them that we haven't really touched on at this point?
Be curious. I would say that just start to be curious about as you go about your day-to-day business. Could be just your home routine on a Saturday. Could be going to work on a Tuesday. Just start to be curious about the things that you're doing and how you're really feeling about those things. Like notice your energy. I would start there and then be curious about the path you're on in general and just like, hey, how did I get here? How did I end up right here where I am right now? And if I were to continue doing what I'm doing, where am I going to end up? And then tune into that. Like, what does that feel like when you do that exercise? So I think just be curious about yourself and your life and where you're at and where you could be and where you want to be would be my parting shot.
It's awesome. Well, Brandon, as always, I really love when you share kind of your wisdom around this and experiences. And, as we build upon this, we're going to, go into part 4. Well, now that you've kind of figured out ways to maybe understand your natural sort of approach and values and how that can be applied to, building more as much potential as possible and realizing it. Like sometimes you need to kind of spread that to yourself, your team, your family, and others. And we're going to spend some more time talking about how to do that, right? Because I think of the team world that we can do a lot on our own, but we can do way more as a team. And that includes not just your work and business teammates, but, family members too, right? These people are part of my, team Savansery. So we're going to spend a little bit more time with that and help you share some of your wisdom around that and building and growing and fostering great teams to do awesome things. So Brandon, thanks for joining me, and we'll definitely see you on the next episode and wrap up this 4-part series.
Can't wait.
All right, brother. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me on this episode today. I really am grateful for you as listeners to the Perennial Pride podcast. I hope you're getting some tremendous value out of it and hopefully pushing you along your journey to financial freedom. I put this podcast together to help you get more educated around your finances so that you feel empowered to live the life that you really want. If you like the content that you heard today or watched, then I would encourage you to go to my website, perennialpride.com. There's tons of other content there. And you can access my book, Wealth Beyond the Numbers. You can buy it there on my website. It's a lot of great tips and tools I've learned to build my wealth and my accounts, build wealth in my life and abundance and joy, and something that has a lot of my experiences in the journey that I've been on personally. Hopefully that can be also of value to you as you sort of move forward. So thanks again for being a Perennial Pride listener, and we'll see you on the next episode.